Welcome everyone to tonight's event, sponsored by the Chicago Monuments Projects in partnership with the 1919 Chicago Race Riot Commemoration Project, Organic Oneness, and Firebird Community Arts. This project combats historical amnesia and racism with public art. My name is Syda Taylor, and I'm the Executive Director of Organic Oneness, which is a grassroots social justice organization that co-creates with communities to mobilize systemic change, healing, and wellness, foregrounding Black, Indigenous, and people of color. I'll be your moderator this evening, and together with guests from each organization, you'll learn about the city's worst incident of racial violence and hear how this project seeks to educate the history and legacy through public art. So we have with us today Dr. Franklin N. Cosey-Gay, who is the Executive Director of the Chicago Center for Youth Violence Prevention, housed at the Crown Family School of Social Work, Policy, and Practice. He also serves as the co-director of the 1919 Chicago Race Riot Commemoration Project, also known as CRR-19. His work emphasizes emerging public health practice just beyond looking at-risk behaviors and researching upstream, examining root causes of violence such as the physical, social, economic, and service environments to address social inequities tied to class and race. Peter Cole is a professor of history at Western Illinois University and a research associate in the Society Work and Development Institute at the University of the, here's a mouthful, Witwatersrand in South Africa. Peter, you'll have to correct me on how I said that. Cole is the author of the award-winning Dock Worker Power, Race and Activism in Durban and the San Francisco Bay Area, and Wobblies on the Waterfront, Interracial Unionism, in Progressive Era Philadelphia. He edited Ben Fletcher, The Life and Times of a Black Wobbly, and co-edited Wobblies of the World, A Global History of the IWW. Later, we'll be able to see some more of our partners. Pearl Dick is an artist, educator, and community builder working in Chicago. She is the artistic director of Firebird Community Arts, and in 2014 co-founded Project Fire, a program that combines glass blowing with trauma-informed psychoeducation for youth who have been injured by gun violence. Pearl has been working with glass for over 20 years and discovered her love of teaching 15 years ago when she had the opportunity to work with youth on Chicago's West Side. Pearl creates sculptures celebrating human connection and shows her work in galleries and museums across the country. Her work is included in the first museum exhibit dedicated to LGBTQIA glass artists currently on display at the Museum of Glass in Tacoma, Washington. And last but not least, Dr. Karen Benita Reyes has been the executive director of Firebird Community Arts since 2008, a proud Chicago public school graduate and now CPS parent. Karen earned her doctorates in 2012 in urban educational policy studies from the University of Illinois at Chicago. Karen is also an active member of the Artist Chicago ACT collective for self and community care. A family-taught fiber and textile artist, Karen learned the healing, reflective nature of creative expression very early. She works with a brilliant team to ensure the smooth and stable production of classes, workshops, and events in the East Garfield Park-based Firebird art space. And then later, you'll hear some more about special guests that Karen and Pearl will introduce you to. So I'm quite excited about that. And before we end, we'll have a Q&A. So you'll have an opportunity to ask the panel some of your own questions. So be sure to get your paper and pen out, or you can just go right to the Q&A and put your questions there, and then we'll be able to talk about it later. So get your ears ready, because you are in for a treat. This will definitely give you tools to create more dialogue to help us move towards a peaceful society. Knowing our history will definitely help us move towards a great and more peaceful future. So Peter and Franklin, take it away.
Thank you so much, Syda, for that very kind introduction. We're really happy to sort of be with you all tonight. So Franklin and I want to thank, I think, DCASE, the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events, as well as the Chicago Monuments Project, for inviting us to sort of present to your audience. We're also mindful of recent events in our city and other cities in Ohio and in Minnesota. And, well, that's why we believe that the work we do is meaningful, even though it's only one small part of really where we need to go. Franklin and I are co-directors of the Chicago Race Riot of 1919 Commemoration Project. And we're here to talk to you about that in sort of three parts. First part, we're going to talk a little about the history of 1919. We'll talk about the legacy of 1919, and we'll talk about the public art that we do before we introduce the artists that we're working with. Of course, we are mindful of where we are literally. And we are thankful for the indigenous peoples who were first here, groups like the Sauk and the Fox, the Winnebago and the Miami, the Illinois and the Potawatomi, the Algonquin and the Menominee. We're mindful that the city that we are in right now is named after sort of a native plant, Chicago, right? And so we are most appreciative of sort of those facts. We're also mindful that the treatment of the indigenous peoples really was sort of the first great crime of Europe in North America, and along with the enslavement of Africans subsequently, as Brian Stevenson, as sort of a leader in social justice and racial justice work in our country, notes that we must talk about the fact that we live in a post-genocide society. And I think that that painful reality is just has to be accepted head on, right, and sort of dealt with. We're also mindful of the words that we use in various ways, and that historically in 1919, in the decades before and decades after that, the term race riot was widely used to describe basically racist mobs of white people attacking Black people. We're also mindful, however, that term uses has changed over time, and that some people think of it in a very different way. We use the term in its original context, although we very much appreciate having conversations about the meaning of language. That's deeply important, we much believe. Right? So with that, we'll get started. Yeah, so in 1919, it was a very hot Sunday afternoon in late July 27th, when a group of boys went swimming in Lake Michigan. They did that because, of course, that's what people do on hot days in the summertime in Chicago. I appreciate that it snowed today, and that is hard to think about hot summer days right now. Yeah, and so in 1919, these boys went swimming, right? Unfortunately, the law might have suggested that people, including Black people, had equal rights, but the customs were very clear, and that was Black people could only go to one beach, right? They only were able to sort of go to 26th Street Beach. And so when they went swimming, these kids from various parts of the South Side went swimming in Lake Michigan, but they departed from the so-called Black Beach, right? Of course, they're in the water, they drift. That's what happens when you go in the water, right? They're on a raft. And as they drifted southward across what opposite of what might be called 29th Street Beach, and a so-called White Beach. And so when these children crossed an invisible line in the waters of Lake Michigan, and suddenly we're in a so-called white part of Lake Michigan, and when a white man on the beach started throwing rocks at these kids, they didn't really think of this as a big deal. They just thought they were swimming and having a good time. Unfortunately, this white man kept throwing rocks at these children, and ultimately a 17-year-old Black man named Eugene Williams was killed. That is the spark. That is the beginning of the Chicago Race Riot. This photograph is actually, as far as we know, the most relevant photograph, the only photograph of the events in the hours immediately after the killing, very close to that spot. And as tragic as the killing of one person is, most killings, like of Eugene Williams, don't result in a sort of an explosion of violence. But that's what happened actually in Chicago, right? Is that rather than a single Black person being killed for really, as we say, swimming while Black, there's much deeper roots that help us understand both his killing as well as the killing of dozens of other people in an orgy of violence. And so we have to sort of keep in mind that, honestly, Chicago's Black population in this era was very small. Before World War I, around 1910, there was about 40,000 Black people in the city of Chicago out of a population of 2 million, right? Under 2% of the population. And that because of the war shortage in World War I and because of Black desire to flee the Jim Crow South, they moved to Chicago in growing numbers in 1915, 1916, and so on. So the Black population of the city doubled in a short period of time. But it is important to keep in mind that 100,000 African Americans in a city of over 2.5 million means that there was only 3.7% of Chicago's population being of African descent. So a small but growing number. Nevertheless, that was the root cause, right, of what was going on. There were seething tensions across the city. Many white Chicagoans, and I include both people of European descent as well as European immigrants, were very distraught at the growing Black population who increasingly concentrated in the neighborhood called the Black Belt. The Black Belt, not a term of sort of being polite. Now the term Black is a term of embraced by people of African descent, but historically, Black was actually in that era considered a negative term, right? So as Black people start moving into the Black Belt, they start to actually gain some power, economic power, political power. They play an important role in the 1919 mayor's race, but they also experience this backlash, always the backlash, right? And so both in Chicago, but across the country, we're seeing rising racism in cities outside of the South due to the Great Migration. We see The Birth of a Nation, this in film. If you haven't seen it, you can watch it on YouTube for free. The most popular film of this era, is deeply racist and celebrates the Klan as saving Southern whites and Northern whites from Black equality, right? We see in Chicago as more and more Black people move into the Black Belt, as the population becomes more dense in that neighborhood, more Black people start exploring residential options in other neighborhoods to find higher quality, lower priced housing. But when they do so, they experience violence. Right, 27 Black homes bombed in the 2 years prior to the events of 1919. Another 21 bombed in the 2 years after. 58 Black people, businesses, or homes bombed. Not a single bomber brought to justice. Not a single bomber. Right. In some cases, people died, like in this photograph on the right, where a 6-year-old Black girl was killed in early 1919 when her family moved into a house at Indiana and 33rd, right? And so this is the city. This is before Eugene Williams is killed, right, that we understand. And I'll turn things over to Franklin for the next few slides.
Thank you, Peter. And the key word that Peter shared was really the lack of justice. So here, this slide mentions that Eugene Williams' murder was the spark. Actually, as Peter described earlier, it's actually the seething tension was a result of the lack of justice. The bombs that Peter described, that no one was convicted from the bombings that happened. Eugene Williams was drowned based off of the description that Peter provided regarding Officer Daniel Callahan refusing to arrest Stauber, as well as really having no regrets about it. Again, consistent with the seething tension regarding the lack of justice, James Crawford, African-American man shot into the crowd, upset, wanting justice. And ironically, he was the second person to die after a Black officer protecting humanity, protecting the lives of individuals, shot back and killed James Crawford. That night, rumors spread regarding Blacks attacking whites, fueled by racial prejudices, that spread. And so essentially gangs of white boys and men invaded and what was then called the Black Belt, at the time, the largest concentration of African-American residents, and started to attack innocent Black people. The spark, again, was the lack of justice. We can go to the next slide. So across much of the city, including downtown, for example, near Van Buren and State Street, where Harold Washington Library is, near Adams and Wabash, about a half a block down from the Art Institute, as well as 10th and State Street. Roving mobs of white men sought out any Black person and they attacked them. Fueled by rumors and poor relations with police officers who were tasked with keeping the calm, they fueled the rage by essentially creating a cordon around the Black Belt. Essentially, about 4/5 of the police department occupied the Black Belt and did not operate with great discrimination in terms of allowing these roving white gangs to enter and attack Black folks. So essentially, most of the violence happened within the first 3 days. 28 of those 38 were killed during the first 3 days. 23 of them were Black, 15 of them were white. There were 537 people injured. 2/3 of those victims were Black. There were 229 people who were arrested. Again, 2/3 of those were Black. The irony, 2/3 victims, however, 2/3 arrested were Black. Go to the next slide. Thank you. So Chicago was not alone. During 1919, the term Red Summer was coined by the NAACP Secretary James Weldon Johnson to refer to a nationwide wave of racist violence against African Americans, as well as Mexican Americans, that occurred essentially primarily between April and November of 1919. 25 different incidents erupted across 15 states, including Washington, D.C., Omaha, Nebraska, Elaine, Arkansas, as well, where there were over 200 individuals that were killed. They were essentially looking for fair rights when it comes to their workplace, sharecroppers. So with that being said, we also had another thing that was happening. As Peter described, the Great Migration, fueled by escaping racial terrorism in the South, but also taking advantage of economic opportunities, primarily because of World War I, which just happens to be the nearly 400,000 African-American veterans fought in World War I or served in World War I. And they were, as W.E.B. Du Bois describes, they returned from fighting for democracy in France. They returned fighting for democracy and their humanity in the United States. This quote from W.E.B. Du Bois comes from his May 1919 essay in his magazine, The Crisis. And so many of those Black soldiers returned from war, essentially, understanding critically how the government works, how their humanity is being protected. Humanities of whites are being protected, but they're not being honored in similar ways. Before World War I, the NAACP had just 9,000 members nationwide and only 300 in the South. But in the 1920s, the national membership had risen to 100,000. And so essentially, you're having what is described as a new Negro movement that is best captured by Claude Mckay in his poem, If We Must Die, that was published in the July issue of The Liberator. He wrote a poem in response to the Red Summer, the different attacks that were happening. Claude Mckay actually wrote that poem as he was going through different towns as a Pullman porter. And so the poem essentially represents that we're not going to sit and be attacked, understanding how humanity was protected during World War I in the sake of democracy, but that democracy was not being honored when it came to Black bodies. Go to the next slide. We like to highlight this work. Why the story is important is because we consider this story an origin story on how Chicago became segregated, and essentially an origin story on how Chicago became two Chicagos. The distress that we see in communities that have inequitable distribution of resources, whether it's related to housing, education, economically, also justice. This didn't happen overnight. There's a quote by sociologist Loic Waquant that states how African Americans have experienced, particularly poor African Americans, experience a legacy of disruption, containment, and stigmatization. These forces essentially impact what keeps communities safe. The ability for community members to sustain networks with each other for support, to come together and use informal social control to enforce beliefs that they have about the community. Chicago did not have official segregation laws in 1919, and many of the neighborhoods, including neighborhoods like Woodlawn and other on the south side and north and west sides, actually whites and blacks lived alongside of each other. However, due to discriminatory practices, that began to shift. Despite the absence of laws mandating segregation, African Americans were denied opportunity to live where they pleased, and violence was the primary method that was used to enforce that. But those mechanisms began to shift over time. We see this timeline captures the different mechanisms that shift, that essentially continue to disrupt, contain, and further stigmatize African American communities and communities of color in general, including restrictive covenants, including redlining, urban renewal projects, such as the National Highway System. And essentially what you begin to see is that segregation becomes concretized. At the same time, there's white flight, there's opportunities thanks to federal programs, as well as local programs that encourage opportunities to build equity in housing that African Americans are not able to do. And so essentially what happens is that the segregation becomes concretized, it becomes solid in a sense, and it's something that we still see to this day. If you look at west and south sides of Chicago, you can go to the next slide. And so this map really describes the restricted covenants, essentially a contract that is based off of discriminatory practices that laid the foundation for segregating Chicago after essentially the race riots, being the largest incident of racialized violence in Chicago, gave Chicago a bad look. And so the systems to continue to segregate remain, but the mechanisms began to change. And restricted covenants was one of those mechanisms, where essentially white neighborhoods formed contracts through property owner associations that sought to prevent renting or sales to African Americans. And what might not be as visible is that you can clearly see that what happens is that you begin to develop a black belt where African Americans are forced to live because there's an agreement essentially that keeps African Americans in the community. We can go to the next slide. One member of the real estate board described this as a marvelously delicately woven chain of armor. Any member of a race not Caucasian was essentially caught behind this color line that exists still to this date. And Peter's going to share another mechanism, particularly as it relates to redlining.
So restrictive covenants technically begin prior to redlining, although when you start talking about restrictive covenants, most people can't help but also think about this concept that essentially this term becomes the de facto term we use to this very day to describe a sort of a host of racist discriminatory policies when it comes to housing and neighborhoods, a subject that we very much highlight, right? So in other words, not only was housing a crucial aspect, neighborhood issues, a crucial aspect, maybe the most important aspect of the sort of the tensions in 1919, it becomes essentially the most important component of racism in American cities and Chicago, but other places as governments, as industries, the banking industry, the finance industry, the construction industry, the real estate industry, all sort of collude with governments at the local, state, and federal levels with the wholesale support of most white Americans. Because these policies don't just happen because the government does it. The government does it because the people want the government to do it, right? And so these policies were popular, right? Even if unpleasant for us to sort of reflect back upon. Specifically here in Chicago, in addition to that, but also in cities across the country, subsequent federal policies will sort of expand and harden segregation of neighborhoods. This photograph on the right, very powerful, familiar for Chicagoans, looking northward to the loop at the back of the photograph and sort of at the bottom is south. To the west, of course, is Bridgeport. That neighborhood was where Black people were moving to in the 19-teens potentially, but when Black people would cross a north-south road called Wentworth Avenue, which became nicknamed the deadline, when Black people move west or actually just walk west, not living in that neighborhood called Bridgeport, they could get killed, right? To the east, of course, is Bronzeville. That term becomes popular in the 1930s. In between, the Dan Ryan Expressway, 10-lane road, built in the late 1950s, opened in the early 1960s. And what does it do? It basically is a wall, right? It seals off. So whereas in 1919, people used violence, In the 1920s and beyond, government policies and finance industry use sort of restrictive covenants, redlining, et cetera. But construction of these highways, right, become sort of our sort of drive through Black neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods, and sort of protect literally white neighborhoods from further attentions. The mayor of Chicago, of course, lived in that neighborhood, Richard Daley. He was also a 17-year-old boy in 1919 and went to school in the same neighborhood where Eugene Williams was killed, right? Of course, this policy is not unique either, right? Like we see these measures in various different ways, including through policing, right? That there's a long history of the Chicago police engaging in racist practices, including killing of Black Chicagoans, right? The killing of Fred Hampton in 1969, the killing of Laquan McDonald in 2014. We are mindful of the killing of Adam Toledo in 2021, right? You know, and so there's what we're explaining is a sort of a host of different policies that explain how containment, which is to say segregation, has happened. I'm sorry, Franklin, after you. Next.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you. And so we believe that omission never leads to healing. We think that acknowledgement must involve recognition of painful histories, and that acknowledgement can begin the long path towards healing by admitting the harms, the social, economic, and political impact of those harms. And this acknowledgement can help towards atonement and begin to set a path for policy level changes to address equity gaps as a result of these harms. And again, we believe that the Chicago Race Riots serve as an origin story for why Chicago looks the way that it does today. And we believe that although it's a difficult history, we believe it's important to recognize the impact that that history has and the way we live with that history today. We can go to the next slide. However, what we are definitely motivated by, and what tonight's talk is an example of, thanks to the Chicago Monuments Project, is that there's growing civic and community readiness for public projects to commemorate the 1919 Chicago Race Riots and those killed. We want to recognize that on July 29th, 2019, 2 days after the centennial of the spark of the race riots in which Eugene Williams was killed, and then James Crawford was subsequently killed, wanting justice, wanting Daniel Stauber to be arrested for causing Eugene Williams' death, that the first African-American female mayor of Chicago held a commemorative event to reflect on the riot and recognize the lives lost and discuss the multi-generational impact on the Black community. Other signs of hope include the city's new Office of Equity and Racial Justice, tasked to examine the impact of systemic racism. And again, we're thankful tonight that there is a movement now regarding critically examining the roles that monuments play, the roles that our public spaces play, whether there are public parks such as Douglas Park. And we want to, shout out the work that many youth and community leaders have done to get Stephen Douglas Park changed to Frederick Douglass Park. And as well as other movements that are happening, particularly in 2015, City Council resolution, reparations for the 118 torture victims of police detective and commander John Burge and his task force officers known as the Midnight Crew. The John Burge Reparations Project, formerly described as Reparations One, includes a $5.5 million settlement for victims and mandatory history curriculum on the John Burge case and the larger history of racist misconduct, many of which Peter highlighted examples that essentially go for over 100 years. This course hopefully will set a precedent for a comparable one on history and legacy of the 1919 Chicago Race Riots. There are signs that there's civic readiness to acknowledge and discuss and learn about the impact of the 1919 race riots. And we believe that the work that we're doing, and thanks to the work that others have done through Chicago Torture Justice Memorials, the work of this group here, and again, the platform that we have, this provides an opportunity to educate those through public art, particularly those that might not be intending to be educated, which is the power of public art. We can go to the next slide. And so related to that, this activism also comes in different places. After the death of George Floyd, we saw the spark in terms of really critically analyzing as a society the role that monuments. Over to the right, you see an example of the Columbus statue, which has been temporarily removed and is a part of critical analysis of many different monuments in public spaces as schools and parks. But we're also proud to highlight the work of activists, including Michelle Duster, the great-granddaughter of Ida B. Wells, to have the first Black woman have a Chicago street named after her in 2019. And this is a street that is a main artery in Chicago. And so I'm going to turn it over to Peter to talk about kind of the inspiration for the art project that we want to share.
Thank you. So on the left is a small marker that honors the memory of Eugene Williams, taken by myself. It's on a small rock on the Lakeshore Trail at just east of 29th Street and just obviously west of Lake Michigan. That was created due to the initiative of some impressive high school teacher and students about 10, 12 years ago. That was the first, and it's the only place or way that the city of Chicago has ever physically remembered the history of 1919, right? By contrast, that photograph on the right, the aerial photograph in Berlin, in the capital of Germany, right? That's a multi-acre monument. And the name of the monument is to the murdered Jews of Europe, right? And so what we have here in Berlin, the capital city of Germany, right? We have this atonement, right? For its great crime. Yeah, and there's many, many other examples of Germany in recent decades sort of making these very public declarations of apology, as well as reparations for that matter, to Israel and European Jews. And on the left, we have what Chicago and the United States has done, right? I'm going to give you one example of a public art project that is very much the inspiration of our project. In the mid-1990s, a German man named Gunter Demnig, who was an artist, installed 20 small markers outside of the last known residences of Holocaust victims in his home of Berlin, right? He dug up some stones, he replaced them with these small brass plaques, and each of them basically says, here lived David Cohen, born 1899, murdered Auschwitz 1944, right? And you're walking down the street and then you stumble across, that's the translation for this German term Stolpersteine. You stumble across a reminder, or perhaps for the first time you learn, right, that something happened right here. Right. And this sort of dispersed public art project is deeply, deeply impressive, even though it's subtle. Right. The fact that what was 20 is now over 80,000 and thousands more being installed every year in dozens of countries across Europe is testament, right, to the power of these small public art dispersed markers, right, that can sort of raise awareness in a way that we believe is very much possible here in our country and our city. And so the short version of what we sort of intend to do is, first, we acknowledge the past in the same way as we began this talk, right? That the only way to achieve racial justice as well as equality and equity is by acknowledging what has happened, and that what has happened is in fact shapes what is happening today, right? In other words, there is no past and present. The past and the present are one. And it is only when we accept that, right, can we sort of actually move towards equality. And in a very small way, right, we could contribute to that with our project by recognizing the worst incident of racial violence that ever happened in our city, Chicago, right, where 38 people were killed in an orgy of violence sparked after the killing of a single Black boy. Right. And we believe that this project can contribute in a positive way to a better city and better country. Yeah.
This work would not be possible. You know, we're the Chicago Race Riots of 1919 commemoration project. We're a project, we are a coalition, and it's really the community partners that make this work possible. And with that being said, I'd just like to highlight that, you know, really Peter and I connected in this work because I serve as the executive director for the Chicago Center for Youth Violence Prevention, understanding the power of community-based organizations and the role that they play serving the residents to make sure that they have equal access to resources. One of the work groups that I like to highlight is the Greater Bronzeville Community Action Council that's chaired by Pastor Chris Harris from Bright Star Community Outreach. And it was actually leveraging The school partners are civic leaders such as Third Ward Alderman Pat Dow, Fourth Ward Alderman Sophia King, as well as key institutions like IIT, and recognizing what ways can we leverage this to tell this important story. We described how Bronzeville was shaped at the time called the Black Belt, but it's important for us to also recognize the many positive institutions. Earlier described the Ida B. Wells being the first African-American woman had a street named after her, recognizing that her home sits between 36th and 37th on King Drive, recognizing that that's right down the street from Victory Monument, recognizing that around the corner is the brick and mortar location of the Chicago Defender, which just happens to be about a block down the street from where that 6-year-old fatally died from a house bombing. So what's important for us is to be able to leverage the community supports. And this is, we want to, shout out many of our community partners that help us mobilize to tell this story. And it was important for us to connect with Organic Oneness, who was foregrounding BIPOC communities, particularly around aiming for racial justice and equity, and most importantly, healing. And we're very excited a little bit later to bring up the work of Firebird Community Arts and the work that they do with offering youth a safe and creative outlet that supports trauma recovery through art. Through this mobilization and through many of the community leaders, we're proud that thanks to Niantic, a software company that provides augmented reality opportunities, essentially looked at the mobilization through this project and understood that our aim was to tell this story through public art, and that we were partnering with Firebird Community Arts to tell this story, and that we're proud to say, and we can go to the next slide, that they are providing the funding to allow Firebird Community Arts to create that. And so essentially, again, what are we doing? We understand the power of public art. It's different than this presentation where, we're very grateful to have the attendees tonight. But what ways can we engage individuals that might not come to a presentation like tonight? We can do it through public art. We know that there are many different examples. One is of Bronzeville here on the right side, and beautiful public art that is up through Bronzeville along King Drive between 35th Street and between 24th Street. We want to install markers at the locations of the killings. Thanks to Niantic, we have funding to provide Firebird Community Arts and their youth to create these markers. Our goal is to have our first marker created by the Centennial of the Tulsa Massacre, which is essentially Memorial Day weekend coming up this year. We aim for that marker to be in honor of Paul Hardwick, who was killed near the intersection of Adams and Wabash. And we recognize that connection is Route 66, the East Terminus, that connects you to Tulsa. We want to be able to tell that story. We want to be able to expand the story across the nation. And we're very excited by what the Tulsa Massacre Centennial Commission is doing. And we want to be able to have that connection. And so we're very proud that we have, thanks to the civic leaders, our community partners, that we are now looking to secure city support and permissions to install glass-blown art that's created by our partners at Firebird Community Arts. We can go to the next slide, thanks. And so Firebird Community Arts, again, has a Project Fire, and we're gonna hear from Karen and Pearl as well. We're very excited to highlight some of our artists that are involved, but essentially youth that have been impacted by trauma and injured by violence. We're telling a story about history, but all history is a current event. And so there's a thread regarding the lack of justice that's definitely been highlighted in our narrative over the past year. But it's also, what are we doing to provide safe, creative outlets to support the recovery and healing? And that's exactly what Firebird Community Arts is doing through Project Fire. They're using glass-blowing mentorship and trauma-informed support groups. We're excited to say that they've already started with prototypes. They're located in East Garfield Park near California and Lake Street. And they are working with youth again to help us create that. We also are hoping that by the 102nd anniversary, which will be our third commemoration event that will also have 5 markers of the 5 individuals that were killed in the area of what the Chicago Defender describes as the Vortex of Violence. Essentially, most of the concentration of violence happened within a 9-block radius of 35th and Wabash. Why is that intersection important? Well, that also happens to be near the headquarters of the Chicago Police Department. Why else is that important? Well, in 1919, on July 27th, there was another 17-year-old boy that went to a high school in that area, and his name was Richard J. Daley. So someone as a public health background, one thing that we talk about is the economic impact of violence. We use a phrase called years of productive lives lost. Compare Mayor J. Daley's life trajectory and Eugene Williams. Where would Eugene Williams be if he weren't killed that day? And so we want to tell that story, but we also want to recognize the thread between 100 years ago and today. Another way that we do this is through bike tours. Each year, our bike tours have expanded. We're very proud that last year was our 2nd annual ride, and we were able to socially distance, wearing masks, have over 200 riders join this ride that not only features where individuals were killed, but again, featuring those key institutions in Bronzeville that were sources of resilience. And I'm very proud of the middle photo that shows Peter and I, one of our One Summer Chicago students, and Antoinette Rags, as well as our Lieutenant Governor, Juliana Stratton, and our third ward, Alderman Dow. And so I am excited. We've taken too much time. I think really the key is being able to feature our partners at Firebird Community Arts. I want to thank you for your attention and your patience. We can be found on social media at Chicago Race Riot on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Our contact information is there. But right now, I'd like to just take this opportunity to pass it to the artistic director of Firebird Community Arts, Pearl Dick, as well as the executive director of Firebird Community Arts, Karen Reyes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Franklin and Peter, for all that information packed into such a short time. Right now, I'm thrilled to be able to introduce everybody to some of our young artists from Project Fire who are joining us tonight. I would like to introduce you to Nkosi Barber, who is also a board member of Firebird Community Arts and an illustrator and sculptural glass artist from Chicago's South Side. Barber is a Project Fire instructor and peer educator who began with the program in 2016. He's since been motivated to support young victims of gun violence. Barber draws inspiration from his Project Fire students and mentors, noting that learning patience and trust have a great deal to do with his perseverance in the art form. I'd also like to introduce you to Keante Thomas, who joined the Project Fire Women's Group in 2019. She is from the Woodlawn neighborhood of Chicago. Keante loves everything about her glasswork, flaws and all. She believes her work is affordable, good quality, and makes her customers proud. She also loves drawing, and she hopes to make her drawings live in the Project Fire shop soon. Keante acts as a peer mentor to women in her group and loves to give back to her community. Finally, I want to introduce Dantrell Blake, who grew up in Chicago. He joined Project Fire in 2015, and he takes a freestyle approach to glassblowing. He likes challenging himself and is always working toward personal growth and change. Trowell once made a collection of 23 bullheads for the Chicago Bulls and BMO Harris Bank. He began his Anger Rejected series in 2017, which is a collection of warped and twisted glass guns that challenge narratives around gun violence. Trowell is also a dancer, singer, and yoga teacher. And I know Trowell has to leave us a little bit early, so maybe he can help kick us off here.
Yeah, I'm here. You can hear me?
Hey, Trowell.
We hear you.
Yeah. So like where should I go from? Like start from?
I was hoping that you could discuss some of the relationship between what you see as a connection between the information that Franklin and Peter gave us about the 1919 riots and the subsequent segregation of the city and systemic racism and what's happening today and what influences your artwork.
For sure. So yeah, like everything is just full circle. Like that they spoke on with Eugene to up to Breonna Taylor to George Floyd, you know, and it's nothing has changed. Ain't nothing changed but the day, you know. Everything's still the same. Ain't the race war never ended, you know. I got a song called They Told Us, you know, and they told us that change was gonna come and it hasn't came yet. You get what I'm saying? So like in that song, in the verse I state, yeah, I was born in the ghetto, but that ain't no reason to keep my mental that low. For decades created a way to keep it untold, but now it unfolds. The things that they do. Been dehumanized for reasons that you don't realize. Most things are designed so they can keep us hypnotized. Play deep in disguise, so deep, but I see through the lines. Deceiving from the ways of teachings, lecture down to deacons. So like even a church, you get what I'm saying, is false. Like I ain't saying God is false, but even the church today, you know, like from the highest hierarchy to the lowest, you know, in our neighborhoods, and like it's over 300 churches on the south side that's not open. You can ride down Racine, Chicago, Racine, Halstead, all the main streets, and you're gonna see over 100 churches, and they're not open. You know what I'm saying? So it's like at one point they was trying to make it seem like something was happening. You get what I'm saying? Like some change was gonna come, but nothing really changed. Ain't no change really happening. It's like at this point, it's like actions speak louder than words. You know, they can tell us so many good things and tell us how great the world gonna be, but if they action ain't really moving towards it, it's not gonna be fulfilled. It's not gonna unfold. Ain't nothing gonna unfold that they telling us. And it's like I'm a realist and a visualist, like before anything. So it's like I speak it more through my music because I know music is the key to a person here, and like a person can really relate to that, you know, or that's just something they go to and run to as music. So it's like I put all my theories, my thoughts, and how I feel about what's going on today in my music. So it's like it's a big to me, it's like they playing with hypnosis on the biggest level, like today. Even with COVID, like they feel like if they can change, if they can move the world how they want to, then they know they doing something right. You get what I'm saying? In their eyes, they feel like, okay, if we can move the whole world in one speck off this coronavirus, you get what I'm saying? Coronavirus, yeah, that's probably real and all that, but it's not as real as they made it. Like the things that should be, if they put corona out here and COVID out here like that on a big level, why not do violence and death like that? You get what I'm saying? And I know why. It's because they making money off that. The government makes money off that. The hospital makes money off that. The police makes money off that. You get what I'm saying? So like the system, the whole system, like it's corrupt. So it's like everything they doing, they want to see us fail. You feel me? As a society. So it's like they want to stay in a lead and it's crazy because they won't stay in a lead, and the law of attraction is real. You know what I'm saying? You only can do so much devilish things for so long, and so many devious things, like, and they manipulating everybody's brains, you know, like on a massive level, like the whole world. So it's like I say they because I don't know their names, obviously, you get what I'm saying? But I know it's a group of people. So at the end of the day, it's like what's next, you know, when it comes to them. It's not what you got to do, but what's next. That should be a thought, but not even so much of a thought. Like it's like what's next for us? What should we be doing? You know, what's our next actions? What's our next steps? What's our next plans? You know, because at the same time, we can't knock that system down that's been set up for 400 years. Today, it's a perfect science. Today, yeah, it wasn't a perfect science then, but now it's a science project. Our communities are science projects. You know, we the lab rats. So like they just testing out on us and seeing what they can do and seeing how we can move. Like, so when it comes to this race war, it never ended, and it's still going on today. Like, but it ain't the main forefront. You know, it ain't something that they want to push out there because they know, like, if everybody wake up at one time, the world gonna move like so crazy in a way that they can't even do anything about it. You get what I'm saying? If everybody stick together in our city, the change will happen instantly. You know, like, so it's like my whole thing about it is it's time for a group of us to really make them action steps. And now, like a lot of people always say, like the Martin Luther King, the next Martin Luther King gonna get hurt, or the next move. No, it's how you move, and it's how I maneuver. I know how to maneuver. So at the end of the day, it ain't what you doing, it's how you doing it. You know, it ain't who you know, it ain't how many people you know, it's who you know. You get what I'm saying? I don't need to know everybody. All I need to be is connected to is one person, one source, a main source that can get me seen, get me known, get me heard. You know what I'm saying? Get my voice across the world, get our voice across the world. You know what I'm saying? Like the people that want the change, the people that's accepting it and they see it, you know? So like my whole thing is like with the race war, because I got a song that I'm gonna drop. I told Pearl I already got a hook to it. It's called Unforgettable War. So it's like, that's an unforgettable thing that's going on, and it ain't gonna leave our brains. But I don't never dwell on anything. That's the main thing. I don't dwell on my thoughts, but I do remember, and I'm very observant. So it's like I stick to what comes in my brain. You know, like I claim the light in the darkness. I claim the living amongst the living dead. You know, so when I say that, the living amongst the living dead, like it's people walking around brainwashed and like I said, being manipulated on a massive level that they don't even realize. So I know these things. Like I'm not the smartest person. I'm intelligent, yeah, of course, and I go off my intuition and my spirit. I'm very spiritual. You feel me? Like, so that's one thing. I know we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. In this body, we supposed to manifest and become what we can to our fullest extent. So like that's like after going through the surgery, I just got like that flame in me that was in me is lit to the max. Like, and I'm just going hard and everything like that I do now. Even harder. I was already going hard, but it's like at this point, it's like now I got to go full fledged. You know, like I'm here. You feel me? I'm still here. Like I remember my whole experience in the hospital. Like, you know how people say they only seen darkness. They don't remember anything when they like in surgery and they get put down. I remember everything. Like, and I'm finna explain it to y'all. Like, so when I got sent into surgery, and it's crazy because this just show you we spirits, like I said, and we don't really know what we are. You feel me? Or who we are. We got to figure out what life is really about, because at the same time, the schools didn't teach us anything. They didn't teach us what life really is, the way of life. They didn't teach us how to become more in life. You know, they just taught us the things they wanted us to know so we can get so far with it, you know, and make it seem like we're doing something. But no, it's like I said, it's a perfect science. Even with the ghettos, living in different contents, like everything happening has how they want it to happen. You get what I'm saying? But you can't stop everything from happening, but you can learn from it all, you know, and move different. Like, so like in my out of body experience, I had an out of body experience and I knew I was going to have one. I was telling people like, I just got a feeling I'm going to have an out of body experience. Like I'm finna get cut open. My spirit is finna get released out of me. You get what I'm saying? So I'm like, and it's crazy. Like, of course it wasn't processing when I was right out of surgery because I was still drained. My life force was still draining. I had to get a blood transfusion and all type of stuff, you know. I had to bring myself back to this world. They told my mama that. They didn't tell me that. They told her they was gonna stop my heart, and I got to bring myself back. So, you know, like I said, me just claiming the light in the darkness. I know where I want to go. I know who I am. I know who I'm becoming. I'm not there yet, but I know evolution is real, and I evolve all the time. I got a song called PTG that I'm working on, post traumatic growth, because I grow through all my traumas and my stories, my struggles and all that. I grow from it. I don't got PTSD. You know what I'm saying? So at the end of the day, I'm becoming something. Yeah. So like in that, when I was laying there in that moment on the table, and right before they went in, I shifted before they can put me to sleep. I dimension shifted. Like I went to a parallel world, like, and before that I seen light, pure light. I didn't see no darkness. You feel me? So it's like I know who I am, and it's like, but right after I seen pure light, it was like it shifted me to that parallel world that's the same as this one. So if I would have accepted that reality, I wouldn't have came back here, and that's a fact. Like take it how you want it. You can, huh?
I was just going to interrupt you for a second because I love this like visioning of the future that you have, and you have so much more energy right now too. But I also want to make sure that we hear from Keante and Cozy.
Yeah,
I'm like in your dreamscape of the future though. I love it.
Let Trowell do his thing, man. He's speaking what he's speaking.
Yeah,
man.
I'm finna get right off. I'm finna get right off as soon as I'm done, like explaining this. But yeah, like I went to a parallel world, and in that parallel world, it was the same reality, but I wasn't paying attention to everything. Like I wasn't paying attention to my body. I wasn't paying attention to nothing. I was like, I'm out of surgery, and the doctors around me, they standing around me, and I'm looking at them, and they just staring at me with papers in front of their hand. Boom, like 3 doctors leave and 2 come back. No, I asked them, where's my mom? They didn't say anything. So I'm looking at them. 2 of them walk off and 2 come back. I'm like, where's my mom at? You know, like, and it's crazy. I was talking regular. I wasn't paying attention to that either. They say she just left. So often I'm now processing in my head. It's like, okay, she left. Maybe it was because I was asleep. She gonna come back. Like, I'm almost finna accept this reality. Like, I supposed to woke up at 2 o'clock after surgery. I didn't wake up to 7 o'clock that night because it's like I was fighting to get out that other realms. Like I was still in a trance. Like, and if my mama didn't come grab my hand, she had to sneak back there. She pulled me out of it. She pulled me back to this world. If she didn't come grab my hand, I wouldn't even be here today. I'd be still in that reality, living that, thinking that's real. Like, and in this world, I wouldn't be here. Y'all know death. Ain't no such thing as death. We transcend, we dimension shift. We go to different realities, different parts of the world. Ain't none of our people that we lost gone. They still here. They spirits. You feel me? They at 100% right now because they full fledged. And when they come to us in a dark way or the way they left, that's because you moving in a dark reality. And when they come in that light or they regular form, that mean you the light. You moving right. You feel me? They trying to give you signs, warrant, let you know signs and symbols is real. But yeah, like my mom grabbed my hand and I looked over and told her I was waiting on you. You know, and that's basically my experience. Like it's more, you know, but that's me like explaining I could have left, you know what I'm saying, left this world and not came back if I would have accepted that other reality. So yeah, it's like we don't really know what we are. Like, and people need to know and understand, like, we are greater than what we think, you know. That's my main thing.
We are so grateful to have you. And I mean, you have so much to say and so much to offer and so much to bring and such a beautiful voice to bring it in. We're grateful for you. We're grateful for your family. And we're grateful that you'll have the opportunity to continue to like spread, you know, your positive message in your communities. I mean, if anybody on this call can't tell, you know, Dantrell is our spiritual guru of Project Fire and Firebird. Listen, meditations, we've talked, he's almost died several times, and we've talked about how he knows he's put on this world for a reason. And we know a lot of the people in Project Fire, you know, many of them have kind of faced a similar experience where they were near death and are now in a place where they have this renewed sense. And you're getting some of this from like what Trowell's saying now, but this renewed sense of purpose. And Trowell, I want to be mindful of our time. So
yeah, I'm done.
I want to thank you for sharing that. And Karen, I'll put a link to one of your music videos in the chat. And we're hoping that when we do get back in person again, and we have these markers placed in the ground at locations that we'll be able to congregate around them, and have performances and present your new song and to like be able to share our truths in person around these markers, commemorating this history. So thank you so much for that, Trowell. Really appreciate you. And so
no problem.
Grateful you're here. Thank you.
Yeah. No problem.
I want to thank also, you know, Peter and Franklin for introducing this project to us. We're so excited and so grateful to have the opportunity to be a part of it. We've been virtual, and as you can imagine, virtual glass blowing is a difficult thing to achieve. And, you know, we're all very close. Our groups that work together work closely together, physically, mentally, spiritually. And it's been really hard being separated. When we first got involved with this project, like officially this past January, we started meeting with the young people in Project Fire virtually. And Peter and Franklin gave us some background and history about what the Chicago Race Riots were And we were meeting on Zoom like this, and talking about like these things that are relevant in our own lives, the experiences that we have in our own communities, the ways things have changed since from 100 years ago, and crucially, the way they've stayed the same. And it's really given us this incredible opportunity to talk about history in light of where we are today in the present. So it's been a real blessing, and to be able to use history to talk about today, because so much, as you've said, Trowell, and which we've talked about, so much has not changed, and there's so much work that we have to do. I would like to, if Keante and Cozy, if you're still here. I'm here at our studio at Firebird, and I actually have I wanted to do a little show and tell, if we've still got some time to do that. And so we've been prototyping some of these markers, like even though we've been meeting virtually, and discussing things and brainstorming and talking about ideas, we've been able to get a couple small groups into the space to actually pour some glass into molds and actually work on something. So I would love to, if I could, show you a couple of these very rudimentary beginning pieces that we're creating, that we're hoping will lead us to what our final product is. But Keante, do you want to help me describe like some of the stuff? If I start to it's not perfect, y'all, but I'm going to hold up some pieces. Keante can explain to you a little bit more about what you're looking at, and we can explain some more, but Keante, can you describe what I'm looking at?
Okay, so basically this is a casting. They went in with a brick inside of the sand and pressed the brick down inside of the sand to make a glass brick. But they poured glass into the little cast of the brick. And then that heart right there is something that they lay on top of the first layer of glass. But we have, okay, wait, I skipped the part. We have our Project Fire, what's those are called?
Logos, the Firebirds?
Yeah, the logos. So we have our Firebird logos at the bottom. Those were also pressed down in the sand to create it like glass.
So that was kind of, yeah, no, thank you. Sorry, Keante, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, I was gonna say that was something that was done first, and I skipped over that. But Risa made a red heart, which is directly in the middle of the casting of the glass. And they went over the heart with another layer of glass inside of the sand, and this is how it came out.
So thank you, Keante. It's perfect. And I hope that at some point, we'll have some of these processes to post online, so you can actually see it happening, or come to visit our studio, when we're able to do that again, to see some of these being made. As Franklin and Peter mentioned, we're going to make 38 markers to honor each person who was killed during the Chicago Race Riots, and then they'll be embedded into city sidewalks at the locations of where those killings happened. So the brick was one thought that we had as far as like an overall shape, and that would be embedded into the sidewalk with this part facing up, and then possibly something embedded within. Using our Firebird logos, as Keante described, was kind of an experiment to see about like traction, like thinking about people walking over the surface, and if we wanted to have like anything that was raised, like how much could be raised on the surface without causing somebody to trip on it. And then we're also experimenting with some other shapes. So we've got so the brick is the first thing we started with. And the brick was used as a weapon during the Chicago Race Riots often. In some of the few pictures that we have, we saw a brick being used against people. And also as like a paving stone. So the project that Peter had kind of brought to our attention, which was our inspiration. So that was one of the first items that we thought of. But then we started thinking about other shapes we can do. And so we're creating these forms. So this is a hand, and this is what we actually press into the sand, what Keante had mentioned, so that it makes an impression. And then when you take this out, you pour the glass in. So we're thinking about creating handprints. And then also, this is a very much work in process. Like we take another way that we can make an impression in the sand is by creating a form. So we're going to create a silhouette of a human head, and then we're going to take those and press them into sand, and then fill those with glass. And then we have a process that we're doing where we can screen print actual glass, like that's been made more liquid, onto the surface of the glass and fire it on so it's indelible. Here's an example of an image of a drawing of a building that was screen printed on glass. And here's some other examples from other projects that we've done. This was, a young woman who's in our program, and it's a picture of her, and then we layer the glass with different images. So we can create imagery, we can create text. One of the beautiful things about glass is that it's transparent, so you can really layer images to tell a more complex story. But Peter and Franklin have shared with us the information about each of these 38 people who were killed during the race riot. So we know, and it's macabre, like there's a whole list of, who they were, their names, their ages, where they died, how they died. And we've been looking at these things, as hard as it is to look at, but getting their information to actually be embedded in the glass with text. We're trying to see how much information we can put onto the pieces so that they're informative. So, we want to call attention to this event. We want it to be something beautiful, but we also want it to be something like thought-provoking, something that people look at and either they get enough information right there, or they're inspired to go look at something else. When we first learned about this project, a lot of us, we didn't know a lot of the details around the Chicago Race Riots, and I've learned since that a lot of people really don't. And many of the places where people were killed and many of the neighborhoods that were impacted are the very neighborhoods where our young people live now. And many of the things that they're experiencing are things that are holdovers from some of the violence that happened in that time. And certainly this past year, while we've been meeting mostly virtually, where we've had so many things going on, some people even had confusion. They're like, wait, are we talking about something that happened 100 years ago or last summer? And it was like, wow, yeah, let's look at that. So it's really been an incredible opportunity. And I hope I've left enough time for questions. And Cosi, I don't know, I'm sorry, we've all been talking so much. Keante and Cosi or Karen, did you have any? I got carried away with my show and tell.
Just something real quick. I just thought it was just kind of crazy that that all this stuff happened in the area that I grew up in, which I think they call it the Black Belt, which we know as Bronzeville, and like I guess Chicago slang we call it the low end of the city. And I'm from that part, and even when I had to walk towards Houston, because it's the Bronzeville or the Black Belt, and it's Bridgeport right next to it, as they was talking about how the freeway kind of disconnected too. And my grandfather gave me a pocket knife when I was in fourth grade, because I used to have to walk from King Drive to Halsted to my mother's friend house, and it's just crazy how racial tensions it was back then. But even when I was a kid, people was telling me to watch what I do when I walk through Bridgeport. And even I remember on 35th Street when it was this police officer, we called him Bone Crusher, and everybody used to be scared of him. But he beat this girl up and knocked all her teeth out her mouth and all this, and ain't nothing really happened to him. And I just remember that as a kid, that just being a big story. It was in the paper, all that stuff. And it's just crazy how like 100 years later, it's like this same stuff. Like now you can go in that area, but then when I was like a kid, you were scared to even walk in that area, and it's so far. I don't know, and that was so long ago when this situation was happening. So that just kind of just sparked me a little bit.
I know that's right where you grew up. It's right over there where a lot of these, like, where some of our first markers are going to go. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for your descriptions, Keante. I'm not sure what we do now.
Open it up for Q&A and bring folks back.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
So thank you. Thank you all for sharing. Karen and Pearl, just thank you for time, and our Project Fire leaders in this work. Thank you for sharing how this art is connecting with you through your lives, how this project is connecting with you. And Pearl, I could have really just sat and listened more and more regarding the work that you're doing with the youth in terms of different ideas, and it's exciting regarding that. I do know that I believe that Syda had to, she is facilitating another event. And so I want to make sure that we're getting to some of the questions. And I know that there was a specific question that was open that pertained to the art. And so while I have, Firebird Community Arts and Project Fire, one question that was asked is, what will be the process to decide which of these amazing pieces will be used? So just want to open it up to describe, to answer that. And, I'll just start off with just ultimately what we're aiming to do is we want Project Fire to, they're the artists. We want to give them the liberty in terms of creating the processes that they think is important to tell this story. And I love that just for the prototype alone, the connection that a Project Fire, it was described by Pearl, the impact of the instrument of the brick as itself being an example, the way a brick was used for instrumental violence to cause bodily harm and death and fatalities for Black bodies in the community. But ultimately, it's that artistic expression, and perhaps the other part of that is the mechanisms that we need to go through citywide with through Streets and Sands, through the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. And so that's what we're working on. But what I'm excited to say is that the art is going to be created as we're doing that. And Pearl or Cosi, Ms. Thomas, any of you guys want to comment in terms of the process in which you guys are going that Pearl didn't already explain?
Well, this is my first time ever seeing the hand and the face, and I really like those ideas. And I think we should if we could use all those ideas, because like all of them like powerful in their own type of way, just like the hand, the face, and the brick. And I don't know, I just thought about the face because I know that back then they used to what you call it, dismantle our faces and like take away our noses and things like that to like so we couldn't be recognizable. And I just think just to have our faces, our noses, is what they really used to knock off, and just show that. And I don't know what I'm trying to say right now, but I think I said it.
Thank you, Cosi.
Yeah, that's too, Cosi. That's something that was on my mind heavy. Like them taking our faces off of like images and everything. I like that. That's something big that I was like looking at earlier while I was in the shop, because Pearl was cutting as I was in the shop earlier, but I didn't know exactly what she was cutting. So when I seen the foam piece of the face, I was actually interested in it, but I didn't ask questions because I was on my way leaving out the shop. So, but I like that idea. I really think we should use everything, because I feel like our hands are important too, because right now they're using their hands to pull triggers and everything else, and not noticing how important it is with how important it is to our communities that we're just like, blindsided on everything, and they making excuses for the polices and everything to stay in the field and everything. I feel like we should use both of those, the face and the hands. And I love the brick. The brick was something that I loved from the start. So the casting, that's something I actually want to do myself. I was not in the shop, but I was on the call when y'all was casting. That's something I like to learn myself before we start the project.
Got you. We got you, Keante. We're going to have you guys all in soon, and we'll all be getting more hands-on with this project. And we're going to make all the pieces. We're going to, part of the reason why the face came up is because we didn't have any pictures of people. Our first thought was we should put people's pictures on these stepping stones. Well, actually, our first thought was we should make something gigantic that people cannot avoid, and they can't walk down the sidewalk without addressing. I think it was your idea, Cosey, in the beginning. And then we realized, okay, it's really seriously in the city sidewalk. So we might have to tone that down, but we're going to make all of them, and we're going to look at them, and we're going to see, as you said, Franklin, which one fits best for the vision.
Yep. Thank you. And I just want to shout out, the support we've been getting from our partners, including DCASE, the Office of Equity and Racial Justice, connecting us to folks that understand the processes involved with actually embedding the art. And so want to, thank Pearl for taking that into consideration and framing that work as our Project Fire youth and leaders are engaging in that. The other thing that I'll just comment regarding the processes, it's the community part of it as well. And, Firebird Community Arts is essentially part of that, but it's also the broader communities. And so we'd also before the installation happens, we are aiming to take some of this art on a road show, present this art. Earlier I mentioned our third annual event, which will be the 102nd anniversary of the Spark of the Race Riots. It will be July 24th, Saturday, July 24th. It will include a bike tour, but thanks to the work of Firebird Community Arts and Project Fire, we're aiming to have 5 markers there to represent the 5 victims that died near the intersection of 35th and Wabash, and have an opportunity to engage in dialogue. I love that Pearl mentioned that these art pieces can motivate conversations, but also performances. We're interested in, ultimately, Peter and I are facilitating the mobilization around this, but we ultimately want community partners who steward the art that's created by Project Fire, and they begin to tell the story. Ultimately, we hope that community partners are leading the bike tours. They're telling the story. They help build the narrative around how the communities were shaped and what efforts we need to do to achieve equity and racial justice. We think that the first step is by recognizing the event that happened. And so I just want to make that comment.
Let me add one point. It's such a pleasure to listen to Pearl and Keante and Cosey and Trowell and others talk about this, sort of being able to sort of witness, right? Like this doesn't have to be the only work of public art about 1919, right? And so when Cosey and others are saying we need a big thing, yeah, I agree with that. I think that's an awesome idea. So in addition to the 38 markers that y'all are going to create and that we're going to put into sidewalks, we hope, in the not so distant future, right? Like, can we do more? Yes, right. Like, I mean, there's not just a single monument in Germany to sort of the Holocaust. There's many, right? Like, and so I think the city of Chicago shouldn't just be doing one thing and then they're done, right? No, of course not, right? Like, could we do much more to sort of honor the memories of Eugene Williams and others? Yes, right. Like, and that would be a beautiful thing, right? And it's thanks to the sort of the work of creatives like yourselves, right? That sort of imagine, right? And so. I'm a historian, right? Like, so like, this isn't my thing, right? Like, so that's why we're thrilled to partner, right? We're thrilled, this is what it's about, right? Like, and so it's a pleasure to sort of be a part even of this event, but also to sort of imagine, right? Like, what,
So we have another question. Thank you, Peter. And I want to be mindful, we just have about 5 minutes left. I want to just thank everyone for their attention. I'm extremely proud to have our Project Fire youth on the call tonight. Thank you for taking the time. I know you guys are seriously busy as well. And thank you for Firebird Community Arts. And so one question from Tina says, what ended the Chicago Race Riots in 1919? And Peter, do you mind describing the process that quelled the riots?
Well, you know, it wasn't a single thing and it wasn't an instant, right? One component was the governor brought in 6,000 troops, right? Illinois National Guard, which actually mostly was there to protect, honestly, white property and sort of white neighborhoods. But nevertheless, the presence of 6,000 ultimately sort of also suppressed some of the white attacks, right? It was raining a lot, right? And so weather matters. It's sort of funny. It was a hot day that sort of sparked the riots in a way. And it was rains, heavy rains result in people going indoors. Crime goes down in the winter, right? Like, so too heavy rains, right? Like, and so something is sort of random as, you know, a series of heavy rains. And of course, really after 7-8 days or so, the real sort of the energy is sort of burned out a little. However, there was an attempt by a group of racist white young men to sort of reignite the riots, right? They actually put on what was called blackface, which is what people performed as minstrels. They went into a Lithuanian and Polish neighborhood in back of the yards, pretending to be black, and then committed arson and made 1,000 people homeless, right? With the hopes that basically East European immigrants would then sort of start attacking African Americans, because largely East European immigrants, more recent immigrants, weren't involved. It was mostly Irish and Irish Americans, Italians, Italian Americans, right? Like, not so much Eastern Europeans, right? Like, but fortunately, it was discovered that essentially it was an attempt to sort of provoke, right, sort of further violence, right? Like, and so it's so incredible to think about, right? Like, so there's multiple factors, but you know, some people really wanted to continue to sort of kill, and fortunately, after about a week, the energy dissipated.
Thank you, Peter. I have another question, and we have exactly 5 minutes left. So it's also from Tina, and thank you, Tina, for your questions. And this goes to Firebird and their connection, how they connect to the 1919 story. I just want to quickly say before I turn it over to Firebird, is that I really sought out Karen because I feel as someone who started off early on the West Side as a young child and then grew up the rest on the South Side, recognizing the role that stigmas play in our community. And a lot of times the narrative is blaming us as individuals, blaming our families, blaming our communities, and not really looking structurally. And I think that there's a thread between what happened 100 years ago, just as Dantrell, you know, broke down passionately and got me fired up immediately, talked about the lack of justice and how things are the same. So I was so excited that Firebird was willing to do this, but I would love to hear from Firebird how you guys connect to the 1919 story.
I mean, and how the 1919 riots ended. Ain't that's how like the riots ended just recently? Like they brought in the National Guard. They let us steal from our neighborhoods and stuff like that. But you saying like they protected Hyde Park. They tried to protect downtown, but they ain't let people do too much stuff the Hyde Park. So I don't know. It was just crazy because that's how it ended today too. I guess when the George Floyd stuff happened, that's how our riots kind of ended because of the National Guard and the other things that that Peter had said. It just slipped my mind. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Cozy. Ms. Thomas or Karen?
I will just quickly add that I grew up at various times in my childhood, blocks from some of these sites, and I went to CPS schools, and I never learned about these incidents. So to me, that was striking, just like how I could live in Bronzeville and go to CPS and not know about these events, and then they're repeating themselves, as Cozy pointed out.
Thomas, you want to close us out?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. Like in school nowadays, they don't teach us stuff like this. So it's like you learning it on your own, and it's like you gotta take the past and just relate it to the future and what's going on now, because they're not teaching us this, or they actually trying to take this away from teaching. Like they don't want this to be taught to us. So it's like we didn't learn some of this stuff. I really didn't know until Pearl gave me this book. Some of this stuff I really didn't learn. I never learned, never heard of. And it's shocking to me. Like, this is really how our world used to be.
Thank you. We have.
That's why you got to be grateful for grandparents. My bad.
No, it's not your bad. Thank you. Thank you. So we just have about a minute left, and I just want to thank everyone again. I'm going to pass it to Peter to close us out, but I just want to offer my gratitude again. Project Fire, when I heard that you guys were going to be able to come, I was so excited. Pearl, thank you for sharing the art. That motivates us even more. And Karen, thank you for your partnership and your leadership in this work. Peter?
Well, I have nothing else to add. It's a pleasure. I appreciate everyone who's taken the time, right? You could choose many other things. Please stay in touch, right? Because we're going to be doing public events this summer, like tours, other sorts of tours. And we appreciate the interest in the work that we do. And we hope that you'll join us in, trying to sort of improve the public art landscape in the city of Chicago. Yeah. So thanks again. Good night.